started now with our education panel. Thank you all for being here. So today we're here to talk about the different ways that professors across the university and the universities apply data science techniques in their pedagogy and the way they teach their students, how they incorporate these things. And as you'll see today, there are a lot of different pockets and ways that this is doing, and hopefully we can talk about how these things come together and learn from one another. So first I'd like to introduce our different speakers here. So first I'd like to introduce Gregg here at the end. She's a colleague of mine at the CU Denver Business School. She's a professor and discipline director in information systems at the business school. Next to her is Rafael Moreno-Sanchez, who's associate professor of the Department of Geography and Environmental Sciences in the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences. Then next to him is Jim Costello, assistant professor in the Department of Pharmacology in the Anschutz School of Medicine. And finally here at the end is Larry Hunter. He's a professor and director of Computational Bioscience program at the School of Medicine at CU Anschutz Medical Campus. Thank you. So just to get started, I'd like to go down and if everyone could just introduce themselves, talk a little bit about their backgrounds and how data science works in your classroom. How do you integrate it into your classroom? So to start, Dawn? Takes a minute to turn on.
Okay. So yeah, I'm Gregg, and I teach Python programming primarily, at least. And so I work with students on how to acquire data, either JSON data or scraping data off of the internet, acquiring it, storing it in databases, storing it in NoSQL databases, and then going all the way through the life cycle to actually go and make plots and numeric analysis on the data. So that's really my whole class. We don't get into the in-depth statistics like some other groups might because I'm not teaching statistics. I'm really teaching the programming methods to use and acquire and use and be able to access data. And then I'm hoping that they take enough statistics that they can apply better or different numerical techniques when they get to the in-depth evaluation of the data. And then in the business school, we have other professors that teach different courses that are more applied, like business intelligence and finance, business intelligence and healthcare, where they're looking at different types of data and how that data is used for decision-making in different business contexts.
Hi, I'm Rafael Moreno. I'm in the Department of Geography, and I work with Geographic Information Science and Technology. That's half of my time, and the other half is natural resources management. It's applying GIS science and technology to resources management. In terms of data science, well, if you look at the definition of data science, as complicated, fuzzy, or evolving as it is the same with GIS science. So it incorporates a lot of many things, and actually there is several papers out there if they are converging or how do they overlap and complement each other. So how do we incorporate these? In many, many ways, we have courses that incorporate modeling, incorporate programming, also classes about the principles of geography and space thinking, how to bring these to bear into analyzing problems from health to microbial stuff. And so the spatial thinking part is a very component, the essence of geography. And I will argue that a lot of the data, if not most of the data, is spatial or could be spatial because we could take off the space out of the equation of time and space in physics, then we will not have too many problems. But it's a very exciting thing to contribute the area of spatial thinking to all this part of data science.
I'm in the Anschutz campus. So, our model of education is a little bit different since we're a medical campus, and especially in the School of Medicine, we don't have undergraduates. We have graduate students only. So some of the models that we'll talk about education are a little bit different from our perspective, and I'll let Larry speak to kind of the computational bioscience program. But a lot of the education we have is in small groups. It's within the lab. And it's working with students and small groups of people to come up with the solutions that we're trying to solve. So my background is pretty varied, and I would say the common theme through my education from grad school all the way to now has always been, data science or algorithm development, or trying to understand how data can inform our understanding of biology. Whether it was Drosophila, whether it was bacteria, and antibiotic resistance, to now cancer, which I consider my lab to be a cancer systems biology lab, where we do a lot of computational modeling and try to understand how the different genetic alterations or just genetic or epigenetic alterations drive disease, and then how do we actually intervene, which is the pharmacology part of that, to stop progression of disease or reverse progression of disease. And again, we have some formal education, and I've developed a course in machine learning to work through small groups of graduate students. And in that context, I've really developed and tried to be very modular, tried to get myself from talking as little as possible and get the students into the data and working with the data, because I find that if they're working with the data, they'll come up with the questions rather than me telling them what the questions are going to actually be. And the last thing I'll mention is, I don't know, have you guys ever heard of dream challenges? Anybody? Anybody out there? Somebody, a couple. I know Larry knows. So these are open science data questions, and these are, international efforts where essentially we take a whole bunch of, really cool data, predefine some questions, and then we just open it up to the world and say, you guys solve this problem. These are really excellent tools for gaining understanding within a domain space. They're excellent tools for, really getting into that domain for students. We use these, challenges within the classroom a lot, where people will say, okay, here's a whole bunch of gene expression data, and we're trying to predict X, go. And here's a whole bunch of people that have, here's a whole bunch of methods that have been applied, learn from that, see what works good, see what doesn't work good. And these are excellent opportunities to get into the space. Some of them actually have cash prizes associated with that. You might have heard of Kaggle or some of these, data science groups. And I think it's a really good opportunity for students to learn the techniques and to apply those techniques. And I'll pass it to Larry.
I'm Larry Hunter. And I want to thank you for inviting me to this panel, Cyrus. I have to say I've never been called a brokerage opportunity before, and I'm looking forward to the market here. I was trained originally as a computer scientist. I had an AI degree and I graduated in 1988, which was the last time the bottom fell out of the AI world, and we had AI winter, and I needed to find something to do with a job I could get. And so I ended up landing at the National Institutes of Health, as the Human Genome Project was just getting started. And they, for a variety of reasons, although NIH is still a little like this, they knew they needed informatics, they just didn't know why or how or who. And so part of my job was to try and answer that in part. And I got a real head-first education in how interdisciplinary work is difficult. I was like the only computer scientist, 15,000 PhDs and MDs on the NIH campus doing research, and I was like the only computer scientist. And so I had to learn to talk to people, I had to learn to understand this complicated biological stuff, how to make some progress in that, and most importantly, how to build community. So I started a bunch of conferences, I started the International Society for Computational Biology, ended up, which is now, the conferences and the society are both really, big things with thousands of people involved, and it's been a lovely ride. And from an educational perspective, I think it's given me a really different look at how we ought to do things. And so I started this computational bioscience program, which is a PhD granting program based at the medical school. Interdepartmental program, has faculty members from multiple campuses here, Boulder, med school campus, School of Public Health, has very interdisciplinary faculty doing things. We have biology and computing in common, but that's a pretty broad set of areas. And the way the educational program was designed was really in the spirit, I think, of what has turned into data science, which is to facilitate those interdisciplinary interactions and not just think about the technical parts. And, our students need to know the technical parts, but to really have a mode of thinking that allows them to be creative in solving problems with these kinds of tools. And I actually, the gentleman who asked the question of the first keynote about what is data science didn't get an answer. It's always a difficult question, but I have a definition, and it's really other people's data science. Okay, what puts us together in common is we're using data that wasn't originally collected to solve the problem that we want to solve. And that means we have to be careful in some really interesting ways. We get the data that's available, not the data we want. And so we have to squeeze it and translate it and integrate it and do all kinds of stuff to it to be able to answer the questions we care about. And that's not just a technical task. That's not just understanding the domain. It's really having a sense of the things that can go wrong and the opportunities for convincing yourself of something mistaken, right? That we're all able to use these very powerful machine learning tools these days. And it's relatively easy to get pretty strong results using these tools. And it's also, especially in the medical world, really easy to fool yourself and to fool others, which is a problem. And so what we're trying to do when we're training our students, and this is at graduate level, small groups and things like that, like Jim was talking about, but is to give them some sophistication about how to use other people's data to solve problems and where it can work and where it can go awry. And there's sort of two pieces of that. So one is that domain knowledge. So people look, for example, at electronic patient records as a really wonderful resource to do mining of with text, with temporal or spatial analysis, all kinds of different ways. But those patient records are not just about patients. So those patient records are an integration of something about that patient, something about the care the doctor was thinking, what do I think is going on with this patient? What do I choose to do with this patient? And it reflects the cognitive processes of the doctors. And it also reflects the systematic processes of how healthcare is delivered in this particular place, in this particular institution. And that all of those things have to be disentangled in order to make proper use of those things. And there's a wonderful example of how that can go awry, which is if you look for all-cause mortality. So you have information about people in a hospital, and you want to know over the next 3 years which ones are most likely to die. A really good predictor of that is having a white blood cell count done at 4 in the morning. It doesn't matter whether it was normal or abnormal. If you have a white cell count taken at 4 in the morning, regardless of the result of that test, you're much more likely to die than somebody who has a white cell count, even an abnormal one, taken at 4 in the afternoon. Okay, and that has nothing to do with the patient. It doesn't even have anything to do with the doctor. It's the way hospitals work. Okay, the people who go do those orders, who execute the test, start at 4 in the morning in the ICU, where the most intense patients are, and work their way slowly through the hospital to the least intense patients. So by 4 in the afternoon, they've got women in labor who need their vital statistics taken or whatever, and those folks are fine. And so what you're seeing is a reflection of the structure that generated the data. And there is no simple way to communicate that to our students. Okay, that's just an example in medical care. And so what we do is we take sort of two approaches to it. One is a broad approach about how to think about data that you didn't collect and what worries to have. And we actually invented an ethics class that was specifically aimed at people who are doing computational biology. And a significant part of that class is thinking about those kinds of structural factors, of social factors, of other kinds of things that you need to keep in mind as you're doing this technical work. And then the other piece is really to dive into the particular domain that you're trying to analyze. I find that the worst mistakes happen when people sort of float in from one domain and say, hey, I can solve this problem with algorithms, and have no idea what the problem is that they're solving or how they came to it. And that's another place that mistakes are made. So there's general lessons you can learn, but a lot of the lessons are just really specific ones about the particular place you're working. And that's what we try and give our students.
Thank you. Building on some of this worries about how potentially these advances in data science approaches could fool you. Many disciplines have their own tried and true methodological techniques and their own epistemological assumptions. So you think of political science and economics. Oftentimes these days they're focused on deduction, on linear regression or different types of regression models. But now that there's these large changes in computing power where we can actually incorporate these algorithms and these much more inductive techniques like machine learning models, in many ways they can challenge or complicate these kind of endeavors, both being much more inductive and then having such large data sets that statistical significance can be rather meaningless at times. So what I wonder is, in what ways have the introduction of these new data science methods affected the way you teach your methodological classes in general, these pre-existing methods? And have you found this convergence, or are these things separate and divergent? And in your opinion, do you think that like convergence is the goal here, or are these just kind of different tools in a toolkit that we use in different ways? And do you want to start, Rafael, or?
I think that's a very good question, and well, yes, it has changed, and again, I think I'm thinking just of what Larry just said in terms of the potential to fool ourselves or somebody unintentionally, and again, when it comes to analyzing particularly spatial data, it's even worse because spatial data has peculiarities and issues that makes it more tricky to manage it and to use it appropriately, such as coordinate systems if they are projected, right, to 2 dimensions, or new representations in 3D or virtual or augmented realities. Then we have the issues of the modifiable area unit problem, in which we can get different results if we have different units, number of units, as well as sizes and shapes of the units. We can get just about any result we want. And we have the first law of geography that tells everything is especially autocorrelated, so things that are closer are more similar. So all these kinds of things, if we don't educate the students or the researchers on, keep an eye on these issues, sometimes we can unintentionally come up with some results, particularly now that we can chew data like crazy with algorithms and machines. And so that's why in terms of education, we have been partnering now since 2004 with Computer Information Systems in doing, now they have a certificate that concentrates in geographic information science. And then we have very good collaborations with civil engineering as well as architecture and planning, because we need to educate each other about some of the things, working with other people's data, right? Mm-hmm. And also some of the folks in other places might not have had the opportunity to the exposure of the peculiarities of spatial data and spatial approaches to the analysis of spatial data.
What thoughts on the convergence or divergence of data science methods with kind of the pre-existing methods that are maybe canonical in your disciplines or professional schools?
Yeah, so I think that we have to be, as practitioners of data science, humble in our openness to the importance of those existing methods and not just feel like, disruption is good. And at the same time, I think we genuinely have something to offer in these discipline hopping applications of new things. And so I'll take a geospatial example. So one of the places I think that's been really interesting is taking that sort of geospatial analysis and using it to analyze microbes over the human body. All right, so we don't think of that as geospatial, it's much more local, but certain techniques that were taken from mostly, species monitoring and the sort of stuff that we heard about this morning turned out to be really useful in thinking about this thing at a very different scale, much smaller scale. So we want to, I think, as generalists, data scientists should be generalists, appreciate the existing approaches and their strengths, and be able to use approaches from other areas and show, if they are complementary, how they might be complementary, and think creatively about how to not just work together and not just stand side by side, but kind of build off each other's strengths.
So, 2 comments on that. So, I'm not sure if convergence, all of us moving towards one common data science or one common set of algorithms or one common set of techniques is necessarily, the goal. I think it's more of an in and out. So, if we can actually gain some, if I'm working on, some system within cancer and we're able to use, geospatial techniques that I wasn't aware of, bringing it to the space to help us understand the system a little bit better, but then to get a little more specialized and to actually start testing a lot of those things. And maybe, we can kind of build from there. So, I don't necessarily know if it's a convergence or divergence, but it's actually more of I kind of see it more of as kind of a wavy type of relationship, bringing people together and then going off and specializing and bringing it together and so on and so forth. And the kind of the second comment about that, I think we can all appreciate that the field in general, data science, or some of the techniques we develop within the lab to measure certain elements of our body is moving so fast that it's almost impossible for us to keep up with things. And the things that I sometimes see within review panels on grants or just papers that get published, it's like, I just applied a deep learning technique, or why aren't you applying deep learning to this? I'm like, well, is that really the appropriate technique to apply to the question we have? Or the single cell sequencing data, is that really what you need to answer this question? So I think really appreciating kind of some of those more fundamentals it's going to build upon and actually see if those are the appropriate techniques you actually need to address the same question. But then sometimes we can build on these things. So, Larry, I'm sure, has a lot of opinions on deep learning, right? So it's a neural network. Neural networks were invented a while ago, and you're just making more layers of that. So, it's not some new magical technique. It's, still building upon some of those fundamentals that were taught 40 years ago when, some of these things came out.
Well, that's really interesting. I mean, it's funny, as a sociologist in a business school, I face the opposite problem. All the research assistants I try to hire want to apply deep learning to everything, and then all the journals where I send papers, no one there understands deep learning or thinks that it's a useful thing. So trying to find that balance.
Welcome to the interdisciplinary world.
There are a lot of faculty members here, many of whom are already using data science techniques in their classroom, others who might want to do that. And there's a lot of grad students here as well who obviously are interested in data science. What have you found to be the greatest challenge for you teaching data science or data science techniques or coding and things like that? And what have you found to be the greatest challenge for your students? And in what ways have you tried to deal with that or to address that? What have been the best ways to approach those problems?
I think my challenge is a little different than the challenges of the other people at the table because I'm working primarily with undergrads who don't have a deep appreciation for the data. And I'm teaching them really how to work in a data science environment, though I'm assuming they would be working with other people that maybe can't code and do those kinds of things. So really getting an appreciation for why you might do different things and what different approaches are, and why different kinds of data are important is I think one of my bigger challenges because you're approaching problems that not necessarily from a domain-specific area, because I'm teaching them how to help solve these problems, but not necessarily have the domain knowledge at this point to actually be approaching them and trying to solve them. So it's trying to make them see the importance of the field without understanding the importance of the field.
How's that work?
Not very well. But I teach a different class that covers data ethics, but that's not for data scientists, for business professionals, trying to teach them don't do this, because these are the big gotchas around data ethics. But yeah, it's both of those. It's trying to educate people on what can and can't happen and the mistakes that can happen.
Yeah, so I'm going to amplify some of that from the graduate perspective. So our graduate program is pretty unusual for a biomedical informatics PhD program. And what we do is we take in graduate students who have strong computational backgrounds, either some experience in industry or maybe a master's degree or something like that, but who are really good programmers who know their stuff. And then we dip them head first into serious molecular biology, which they've probably never seen in their lives. We have this molecular biology core course that all the graduate students in pharmacology and physiology and immunology and neuroscience, they all take the same course their first semester, and it is brutal. Okay, it's a couple hours a day, every day. There's weekly exams. It's a lot on experimental design. It is really, bringing you into the research world of molecular biology. And our computer science backgrounded students often hang on by the skin of their teeth. We provide tutors. We really support them. Almost all of them pass. And when they're done with that one semester, they think that they are biologists, okay? They know as much neuroscience as an immunologist does, and as much immunology as a neuroscientist does. And they no longer think of themselves as service people Okay, one of the issues I think that data science people have is they think, okay, I have some skills in computing and analyzing data and scraping websites and stuff, and you tell me what your problem is and I'll solve it for you. And I don't think that's a good model. I think it's got to be more domain specific. You have to know something about the problems you're trying to solve. You can't just walk in with algorithms or deep learning or whatever it is and hope to be useful at all. And so our students, by the end of that class, they're like not just going to solve your problem for you. They're going to tell you your controls suck in that experiment, and you got to redesign that. And they are part of that world. And I think that's what makes them such good scientists when they graduate, is they really have both the computational skills and just enough of that, domain experience. I mean, it's one semester. We're not talking about a whole lifetime of study here. But they came through that like a fraternity hazing, all right? And they really feel like they know something. And that's enough. That's what kickstarts the collaborations that work, where they can really talk to each other, talk to others who don't have the same data science skills, but really know the economics or the sociology or whatever. And I think that's really critical. If we're going to train people who are going to be good methods developers, serious data scientists, we need them to have that sense of themselves as part of whatever it is that they're solving, part of that domain.
I guess to kind of build on what everybody's been saying, but the one thing that so data science, the heart of data science is data. So don't just come in with your algorithm and apply it to a big matrix of numbers and predict something and think you've solved something because your precision is great and your AOC is great. Coming back to those data challenges that I mentioned, there's a particular professor at University of Michigan who, for whatever, she's a savant. I mean, she can solve any problem. And when you talk to her, kind of query her about like, well, how do you solve all these things? I mean, she's using, standard linear regression. She's using very simple methods. The thing that she spends the most time on is deeply looking at the data, plotting it every possible way she can plot it, look for patterns, and try to identify those. And then once you have an idea of those patterns you're looking for, visually or whatever, then the algorithms are easy. You just say, I'm looking for this pattern, and you pull it out. But deeply, deeply looking and exploring the data and understanding what the patterns are in the data, what it can give you, what it can't give you, I think is often underappreciated or maybe undertaught, and people just jump to the algorithms to make predictions on whatever. So that's what I would say.
To add to that and reinforce what you guys are saying, I think in terms of the challenges, and this is through the interdisciplinary collaborations we have had here on campus, is the background of the students. Like Larry was saying, they come in geography. If you have a WebGIS class, this is the first time they have seen any web technologies. So we're just throwing them into the deep end of the pool. But yeah, that's a great experience. They come out being like, I'm a great developer. Of course, it is not so the case. But so it's the background of the students. And then also the other challenge is through the years in talking to folks in the other departments and colleges is that there is no space for having too many interdisciplinary courses. The curriculums are too heavy, too structured to be able to do something jointly or loosely fit or whatever you want to characterize it. And now with these new things that are happening nationwide of the student numbers and budgets, it's going to get even worse because you want to keep the students within your department, discipline, college, or whatever. So I think those challenges, we need to think how can we address these curricular as well as structural challenge, institutional challenge.
Yeah. Jim, thoughts?
One quick example. Psychology's got a question there too. So there's very specific examples. If you wanna humble a data science person, have them predict something biomedical, and then have them present that model to a clinician and say, you need to measure all these 50 parameters and you need to blah, blah, blah. They will look at you like you're crazy and say, that's just impossible. What you just proposed is $10,000 worth of tests that are going to take, a year for me to generate. That's not going to work. So being constrained and knowing the domain and the space that you're actually looking at, again, is super, super important.
So maybe one more question, and then we'll open it up to the questions in the crowd. That's okay? So as you know, it's been a major theme today already. Data science is an interdisciplinary endeavor and taking place in all these different parts of campus. This is only my second year at CU Denver, so I'm still learning the terrain a bit. But it seems to me, it's my perception that most of this is being pioneered either at the classroom level or in perhaps more of the technical fields at the program level. And so I was wondering, what initiatives have you been a part of, or how do you see moving forward, building more of this interdisciplinary collaboration to push this data science forward? As Kevin was talking about earlier in response to Farnish's question, a lot of stuff that happened at Berkeley initially was bottom up, and that's what it seems like is happening here. But how do we bring this together to in a way that's most effective both for people in different disciplines, but also where we can learn from each other and do something that's coordinated?
On the downtown Denver campus, a group of us, Farnoosh and some people from Math, Justin and Diana, are meeting with the ODE, the online digital education people, to put an undergraduate data science degree on campus. And we're right now in the process of designing who all gets to play, and what courses we want to do, and do we do domain knowledge from the start all the way through, or do we drop domain knowledge in different courses, but really looking at something that's interdisciplinary at its heart, so it won't be owned by any of the schools and colleges, and then what they need to know and what part of the life cycle of data science where do we start, where do we end, but the key challenge, one of the key challenges I think we're facing is what domain knowledge do we bake in, because data science is so domain specific, and just dropping a data set on students where they don't understand it is not useful. Is how do we get the domain knowledge in, and do we pick one domain and have it as a theme across the whole program, or do we say start with health and do business, and so, but we are working on that, and that was facilitated though I think by campus wanting to put something online, and then helping to bring up together people from different schools and colleges.
This made me think of something that has been mentioned several times in different conferences, but particularly in GI science, is the issue that traditional semester, one-year classes and education is getting to be a little bit too slow for how fast things are changing and evolving. So I think these opportunities that our first speaker mentioned in terms of hackathons, informal groups, weekend workshops, boot camps, whatever we're going to say, will become more important, and I think more dominant in how we deliver education, particularly interdisciplinary education, because then it's informal and focused into some specific challenge or problem that we want to address interdisciplinarily. I think that's the way forward, and I think we have been doing, with my friends in computer science, in business school, civil engineering, architecture and planning, in some way, shape, or form, we've been doing it. And now we have an amazing geospatial librarian, Diane, and she provides a platform and space for that kind of thing. I think we are in very good position to start moving in that direction and see how far can we take it, and probably formalize it for credit, whatever is necessary, so that those activities count towards the students' degrees.
Thoughts on collaborations across the disciplines or programs?
You don't really want to hear my opinion on this.
Yeah. Let's make it provocative.
I'm cynical and angry. So if you want to change the way a university works, which is, I think, what you were talking about, follow the money. And when you look at the way the money actually goes, you can see why administrators are your enemy. All right? They want money, and they're paid to take care of their school or their program or whatever it is. And so they worry about tuition revenue and all these kind of other things. But they have nothing to do with trying to put together an interdisciplinary program that breaks down these boundaries. And having tried to cross boundaries between Anschutz and downtown, and Anschutz and Boulder, and between the School of Public Health and the School of Medicine and the graduate school, and it's all just exhausting and mostly fruitless. And it better be bottom up, because it sure as hell isn't going to, those top-down initiatives mostly suck. The shotgun marriage between our campuses, I think maybe there are a few little bright spots that you can find, but more or less hasn't helped anybody but those administrators making what all of us together, paid. And so I think we just have to do it. And to the degree that we have the opportunity to change the way money flows in a way that supports interdisciplinary work, either training or research, then we should take advantage of that and do it. But it's an uphill battle, and I would leave it for the old guys and gals. But it's when you're trying to get your research program off the ground and you're teaching and stuff like that, don't fight that monster. It's just too big. Sorry.
So maybe I haven't become as cynical as Larry has yet, but I see the challenges, and I echo Larry's sentiment that if it's going to be done, it's going to be done at the grassroots. And I think all the most successful things that you can see, especially within interdisciplinary, have to be grassroots. You can't mandate, two different groups to work together. It just doesn't work. If there's no interest in working together, it's not going to happen. Having said that, I have tried to really build some relationships with at least our camp, my program, and Boulder. And that's with the younger professors, quite frankly, that are still open to kind of working together and have a little bit more time. There's the NIH's administrative burden, which as I move up in my career stages, realize that that's a pretty big time suck. I think the younger people who get really excited about the science and really excited about the opportunities are the ones that are going to push those things forward. And the administrators will be happy to take credit once all the cool stuff happens, right? And maybe that's the way to push it forward. So,
all right, well, thank you all. And I think that one thing that is a great product of this Anschutz Downtown Denver collaboration is the people that are here today, just right here on this panel right now, and then also about 90% of the attendees and faculty. So thank you all for coming here. So I think this is like a great time to open up for questions. So I know we have one right back there.
Well, it's wonderful hearing all of your thoughts today. I really appreciate it. I will just put a plug out there that I think the students really like to be in classes that are interdisciplinary and together and working together. So if just a simple way is to remove as many of the necessary prereqs and try to open it up to get in the students that way. So one of my questions is, I love the idea of looking at the data and really being knowledgeable about the data and getting involved and asking strong research questions. I think it's really important. On the flip side, if we use our data twice, we have a lot of error, right? If we look at our data and we're like, well, I have 1,000 metabolites that I want to look at. And here's one where, look, it has a linear regression. I'm just not going to look at the other 999. I'm going to look at this one. And look, it's got a p-value of 0.05, I'm set. So how in your class do you encourage students to look at the data, understand the data, know the data, while at the same time helping them understand that they have to do it in a certain way to not increase the error that comes along?
Very sassy question. I think developing a sophisticated understanding of errors is what we are trying to teach. All right? I think often we focus on our successes, where in fact what we really ought to focus on are our limits. And errors come in a lot of different ways. And data science is really extremely good at teasing out all the different ways to make mistakes. And so there are mistakes that we can make from the beginning of what kinds of data we collect and how. Missing at random, bad assumption. Okay, it's not good. And then there are additional mistakes we can make along the way. Transformations that we should or shouldn't have done. Statistics we should or shouldn't use. Visualizations that make clear the results or not. Don't get me started on p-hacking. So what we owe students trying to learn from us how to do this well is an appreciation for the importance of all those different kinds of errors and the various strategies that we might have for recognizing and ameliorating them. And it kind of depends on what's at stake. So living out at the med school, we're extremely attuned to certain kinds of errors. Because if we make those errors, we could kill somebody. Okay, that's serious. And so the medical profession is very cautious about adopting new techniques. And a good p-value is really not enough, as Jim was talking about, to get something out on the floor in the clinic. All right? You really have to demonstrate reliably, sometimes to federal regulators like the FDA, that what you're doing is, at least on balance, good for the people you're doing it to. That's a higher level of accountability than most data scientists ever have to face. But even if you're looking at stuff like who's getting a loan or who's, I don't know what sociologists study around this, help me here. But, the kinds of things that sociologists study, you should still be thinking about, is this going to do damage to people? Is my result really meaningful in changing the way we act in the world or understand the world? And how can I be sure? What steps should I take to be careful about those kinds of errors? Statistics are part of it.
Sociologists study who's not getting a loan, usually. So.
Well, that's so right. I mean, the kinds of, that, right? So we should be really careful in studying those things, right?
What are thoughts?
That issue of uncertainty and error propagation. So we put little, in the labs in modeling, we put little balls and kind of move the ball. So how it moves through the modeling process and what could be some of the consequences. And also make the students aware of the issues of measuring, as you said, as well as representation. So, like the maps, if you put a line between two soil types, how good is that line of dividing two soil types? Where is all this uncertainty? And so get that from the bottom and say, now how does that all spread to the thing? From in an informal way, just thinking about it, to a more formal statistical or database approach to it. Again, we cannot go too deep in a class of geography, but then we point them to our friends in math or in statistics, right, to at least peek into that stuff. And I think many of us in geography, we use this slide of Spider-Man that says, with great power comes great responsibility, because we have all this power of an analysis, but we have to be responsible about it.
Other questions? Okay.
Thanks. So I'm an undergrad that doesn't really know what they're doing. Like I was undeclared until last semester. Your points on the lack of domain knowledge strikes heavily for me. I wonder how feasible it is to take different domains across different institutions and have them create repositories of reproducible research, rated both in terms of the complexity of the domain subject in addition to the complexity of the technique involved, in order to help stimulate the development of the curriculum or harness a lot of those people that have experience with a lot of programming techniques, for instance, and giving them something to do to help develop their domain knowledge throughout the high school and undergrad and further sets of time.
So I do think there's some common principles and basic knowledge that is certainly being taught at the undergraduate level and even the graduate level that you do need to know. You need to know basic statistics. You need to know basic programming. So I do think there's fundamentals that you're going to have to learn to build off of. So we're not saying like you can't work in the space unless you know everything there is about the immune system. And there are commonalities between these data sets. And I'm going to throw another plug out there for these data challenges, because the great thing about these data challenges is you've got the data. It's been cleaned and processed by the the experts. Although you might argue how good data actually is based off of that, based off of the assumptions that we made in actually processing that data. You've got the question that's very well specified, and if it's defined within that context, it usually means it's a pretty significant question. And at the end of that, you have 50 teams that participate, and you can see how the different methods performed on that same common question in an unbiased way. So, go to those papers. I have several of them that, have evaluated 50 methods that have tried to apply to solve this question. And we go through, what are the advantages and disadvantages. And what you'll notice is typically what ends up happening is the top performing teams are, the good data scientists, but they also have some domain knowledge within that group. So I'm looking to predict sensitivities to breast cancer. There's a certain set of a cassette of genes that are typically very important for breast cancer in response to different therapies. And if you knew that, you can weight those features higher than the other features that you're looking within your model. And then you get more biologically meaningful results out of that. So I think, gaining those skills within the space, it's not undoable. In fact, as Larry was pointing out, without too much training, you can get into that space pretty deeply. But then I think it's just years of going through it and, kind of learning the language, learning the space, if that's in fact what you want to be applying to. And this gets into the trade-off between specialization versus generalization. And I don't know if you guys want to talk about that and where you see the benefits and disadvantages in specialization versus generalization. But yeah, the data challenges are a great way to kind of get that domain knowledge outside of your classroom too.
I think we would love to have data that was so well defined. I'm going to look at your data challenges to see whether or not they would be appropriate for incorporating into the undergraduate curriculum that we're trying to work on. But yeah.
Other questions? I saw there were some here. Do you want to bring the mic?
Thank you. I really appreciate that the importance of domain knowledge was one of the main themes this morning, both in the keynote talk and in this panel. So maybe we should take it to the inevitable conclusion: we need data science courses infused with domain knowledge all over, everywhere.
Classrooms on the Anschutz campus are a little bit different than the classrooms on the Denver campus in that, we typically have very small cohorts of students. And really, our classrooms, in my view, is my lab and the collaborators that we work with within that context. So that becomes very specialized very quickly outside of the typical classroom.
I'm referring more to the administrative obstacles to offering a course called the data science, because there is already one somewhere else, and those really ought to be removed.
Yeah. Unions. Okay, I think you're right. I think that it's fine to have a data science course in the business school and a data science course in the math department and a data science course in computer science and a data science course in biology. Okay, that's all fine. You're convincing administrators of that is an uphill battle, and it's horrible. So I guess, we can try to bend to their will and do modular ones where we share some segments that are common, and, have some specialized pieces for our particular students and the like. The fact that we have to fight administrators to figure out how to teach stuff that we know how to do is really sort of a sad comment on where we are. And one of the things that I want to speak to the undergrad question for a second is there are so many opportunities right now. If you want to dive in on some of this stuff, and you wish you knew more about cancer for the Cancer Challenge or geospatial stuff for trying to save, endangered species or whatever, the resources available to you, and some of them with reproducible, workflows and data that you can get your hands on. Thank you, Jupyter Notebooks. We'll hear about that in the afternoon. This stuff is now so amenable to people without without years of classroom background to come in and be able to get their hands dirty and start doing stuff that's actually interesting and exciting. You should take advantage of those opportunities, and we're just going to have to swim upstream against the institutions that organize the way we teach.
So we have only a few more minutes, and I saw a few more questions here. So if we could move on, I saw right here was a question. And one in the back. But if you can bring it up, because we need that. We're recording everything, so if you can.
Hi, I'm Carlos, a data scientist with Transamerica, with a previous life in particle physics research. And in that previous life, I used to think about things about fixing everything except a variable, and then varying that variable and see what happens. When I transitioned to data science, I understood that nature is definitely not univariate. So it's multivariate, and in addition, it's nonlinear. So I agree with you that data understanding before applying a model is definitely needed and very important. But what the algorithms add to that is exactly this multivariate and nonlinearity exploration of that data. I see in the field and with my interactions that many times even data scientists don't realize this. So my question is, how do you incorporate this? How do you teach students this notion of multivariate and non-linear nature of data?
I think there's, Karsten's in the audience somewhere. Oh, so Karsten specializes in data visualization, and I actually think data visualization is a really powerful way to get at some of those events, some of those features of the data. So I think, when you talk about, my favorite one is, you take a two-dimensional space and you look at a support vector machine and how it draws a border around, the space it's looking to predict. And if you take that in 2D space and then project that to 3D space, you can really see, that there is a linear separation of the data. It's just how you're transforming that data or projecting that into some different space, right? So I think data visualization is a really powerful way that we could do that. You can do nonlinear transformations to the data and look at how patterns emerge. And ultimately, that's what the algorithm is trying to find. It's trying to find those patterns and draw a border, usually. So that's the way that I try to do it, is just through visualizing it as many ways as you possibly can.
So one more question in the back.
So it appears that in the medical world and certain things, there's a lot of data out there. People are willing to share their data. In business, that doesn't seem to be the case. If you're looking for business data, which I am lately, it's very hard to find data. It's proprietary. We don't want to tell you what we're doing, things like that. Is there anything that the university system can do to allow us to have or to share more business-related data that can kind of help out?
Let me know, because I have the same problem. So,
I thought we had a hard time. Okay, patient data is really hard.
Yes.
Okay, you have to be really careful with it because, like I said, with the other thing, you can hurt people by accidentally releasing it. Because you can hurt people and because there's a lot of law around it, the institutional structures around things like patient data are extremely restrictive. Hospitals, by the way, are businesses, and they don't like sharing either. And so I think we don't have it so, the grass is not that green on our side. On the other hand, one of the things that I think if data science is about anything, it's about other people's data. And one of the things that we have clearly seen in this evolution in the last, decade or so, is there's a lot of really available cheap data out there that if you squint at it right and twist it really hard, you can get some traction on a question that you care about. And so part of what we're trying to learn how to do and teach our students how to do is be clever about how we can use what's out there. Because the data that we want, if we could design an experiment, this is certainly true in sociology and economics and the like, you can't do that experiment. In medicine, it's pretty hard to do that experiment. So instead, people have been carrying around Fitbits or phones or, there's some weird, cheap, easily available ton of data. I've been trying to do a lot of stuff with text because biomedical journal articles are by and large available, at least in the open access world these days. So you've got to be creative.
So billing codes are a good example of that, right? So one of the things that Larry was referring to, I was going to say, mention billing codes, but when you talk about how people think about and structure the data, largely they're trying to figure out how I can fit this patient into a set of billing codes. And how do you actually translate that back to what actually happened to the patient? So, I think there's, and you can get access to a lot of that information through Medicare and, so on and so forth. But, and I think the other aspect is culture within the different fields. So, physics has been, especially, particle physics, and they've figured out this data sharing, this, sharing of, responsibility and credit for the work that they're given. And, I think you're seeing it more within, as data scientists kind of get out there and we really push open data and open science. I think, it's changing the culture a bit. But maybe it hasn't reached the business world as much as it has in other areas. So I think it's just a cultural shift too. So
I absolutely contend we need to start educating students and faculty and law schools and whatever about the importance of openness, open data, open science, open access, open everything, because, and goes to our next speaker, which I think is fundamental for the future of humanity. If we don't open this thing, it's going to be too late for some stuff.
Okay, cool. Well, unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. I'd like to thank our wonderful panelists, Don, Rafael, Jim, and Larry, for making this a really engaging conversation. Hopefully this will continue on to lunch. So if we can give them a round of applause.